Our final talk is from Madeleine Evans from Levell or Levell. Yep, whatever, okay. And she's going to be looking at us mental health and productivity in work culture and how to tackle both at once. Madeleine is the founder and chief executive officer of Levell, okay, a startup with a mission to eliminate burnout. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, Madeleine.
It's fascinating. I think you'll see a number of similarities and overlaps between some of what I'll talk about and what was just talked about in the previous presentation, because ultimately loneliness is one of those aspects, drivers and symptoms of poor mental health, but also that can impact productivity and performance at work. Just a couple of really quick stats. The issue of poor mental health has recently gotten to the level of awareness where it is being treated somewhat like an epidemic. So the number of people who have felt, at least at some point in their work in the last 12 months, being unable to cope, 74%. Gen Y, the younger generation, we heard that it's hitting them harder. So approximately 25% feel stressed almost every day. And approximately 20%, depending if it's anxiety, depression that you're looking at, of people in work will present with what they would call a mental health problem, so ill mental health, something that they're already experiencing in a negative way. At the same time, we have questions about workforce productivity. GDP or output going up. We saw this also earlier in terms of working hours. Those are going up. Productivity going up a lot slower. So what's the link? At the moment, the typical way in which an organization might address this is in silos. On the left-hand side, you have productivity strategies. Let's think about things like workforce restructuring. Let's think about changing work, becoming more agile, digital transformation, investing in data, RPA, job automation. And then increasingly, organizations are taking the initiative to tackle mental health. So addressing mental health through mental health targeted strategies. Doing some work with an organization, a think tank called Tomorrow Company, to understand where that is actually falling within the organization, and it really differs. It will probably tend to fall within HR. It could be a kind of an MD who takes the leadership initiative on mental health. In 2018, approximately 1/6 of organizations had a mental health strategy. That was then set to increase by approximately 1/3, and then another 25% in 2020, such that in 2020 we would see approximately 3/4 of organizations having a mental health strategy. And that is typically designed to address the symptoms or the issues arising from ill mental health. And that will typically include a combination of things to address the stigma, building awareness of what it looks like when you have anxiety or depression, the issues related to that. Perhaps awareness campaigns, mental health first aid, usually investing in what's called an employee assistance program, a place for employees to go that's confidential counseling to talk when they need support. Which is interesting, because as humans, I think fundamentally, if we ask ourselves the question, is our productivity at work and our mental health or our well-being interrelated? Raise our hands, we'd probably say yes. We know those situations where we have not slept, we're worried about something at home, we come to work, there's no way we're paying attention. We also know those situations where we've gone to the gym yesterday, we didn't eat the flapjack, we had the green smoothie, maybe we didn't have the green smoothie, but we showed up at work, we're really energized, and then we go straight into 8 hours of meetings, and our budget proposal is summarily dismissed, and let's just say our mood, stress, energy, and motivation are not where they were when we started. I want to show you a couple of graphs that help you understand what is happening at the human the psychological and physiological level when you look at the interactions between kind of productivity and performance symptoms and symptoms of ill mental health or positive mental health. So this is called the stress performance curve. It shows the relationship between human performance, defined effectively as sort of task execution, so think actually of traditional sort of athletic performance, but there are correlates to the workplace, derived from being under strain. And so you can see how with sort of a little bit of stress, strain, pressure, your performance increases. And when you get to the top, you have this kind of breaking point where actually if you're pushed too far, it's too chronic, it's happening too long, you go into a position of, say, exhaustion, and you can see when you get into situations of burnout, actually your performance significantly declines. And that is also borne out in research. So we see correlations between the levels of burnout of the workforce, which is a spectrum condition, so between mild, kind of moderate, and severe, and task performance, so task engagement, errors. There's been a lot of research done actually in the healthcare and GP space where levels of burnout are over 60%. Impacts patient care and manner considerably. It's really shocking. The second thing is to think about how does burnout and then kind of correlated symptoms of stress and exhaustion connect with mental health. So again, this is just presenting what we might call the mental health or well-being continuum. Anytime you measure ill mental health or positive mental health, all that is capturing your feelings, your thoughts, your expressions with frequency and intensity over a period. So if you have intense and frequent feelings of low mood within a 2-week period of time, that's going to put you in a position of being diagnosed with potential depression. If you just have them sometimes, that might just be called low mood. It's the same thing with feelings of anxiety. So we can think of it as a continuum. I showed you some stats in the beginning. This is pretty consistent across many different surveys in both the UK and the US. The US is a little more extreme in terms of people being over there, and continental Europe is a little better in terms of fewer people being over there and more being on that side across the workplace. That might tell you something about work cultures. Is that 60% of people will be presenting with feelings of stress and exhaustion at kind of moderate level within work, so somewhat frequently. Between 30 to 40% of people will be in that stage where they're actually experiencing stress or feelings of exhaustion almost every day. That's when you get into kind of pre-burnout stage. And then situations of presenting with conditions of anxiety and depression, and then also severe burnout will range between somewhere between 10 and kind of up to 20%, depending on what it is. There's also evidence that people who have conditions of burnout are 2 to 3 times more likely to be experiencing anxiety, depression, pain, and also problem drinking. And those are all symptoms of ill mental health. On the flip side, you have what we might call kind of positive well-being, feeling energetic, motivated, positive mood, relaxed, and calm. Just to bring it home a little more, it's an interesting thing to look at the correlations between stress and creativity. So here you see stress or strain elements. There are 5 different stages, and then someone's creativity or reported feelings of creativity within work. So with a tiny bit of kind of strain and pressure, you might get a little bit of increase in creativity. That's probably just pushing you to kind of focus and deliver. But the more strain or stress that you feel, your creativity goes down actually even below neutral state. And this is not something that's affecting a small percentage of the workforce. This is not something that shouldn't be on our radar. This is a quote just from one of our clients. You know, a big part of their business is sales. People are on the road with customers all the time. They do see people getting burnt out. They know it's happening, but not sure kind of exactly how to deal with it, what to do. Equally, Gallup, a recent poll of 7,500 workers, showed that approximately 66% of people had felt they were experiencing feelings of burnout at some point. 44%, sometimes 23%, very often or always. So just it's a little bit on the higher side depending on what questions you ask. They probably weren't asking exactly the same questions than what I showed you before. But within companies, there is still a little bit of a blind spot of understanding what are the implications of this performance and also employee experience. So this is research from one of our advisors, Julia Miller. She's affiliated with the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence at the Workplace, looking at patterns of engagement and burnout at work. And actually here, you have a really interesting profile. It's about 20% of the US workforce, that's a sample of just under 20,000 people, that exhibit what we call being highly engaged but highly exhausted. So these are the people that are probably your high performers, that are putting all their effort into workplace, but they are also in the early stages of burning out. And we know what the implications of that are, both for their eventual performance and productivity, also for their retention, which I didn't actually mention. There's strong correlation between later stages of burnout and voluntary turnover, as well as for their mental health and even physical health later on. So it's something that we should look at. The question is, how can we look at it? Here's a little bit of a roadmap. Seems simple. Let's identify when people are feeling in stages of pre-burnout or in the stress response. Let's figure out what it is that they're responding to, what is causing those feelings, physically, mentally, and emotionally, maybe even motivationally, because that's an element, actually, of burnout, both across work and non-work. And then let's try and fix it. Ideally prioritizing common issues. We want to be effective, get our money's worth, where we make investments across the organization, benefits, workplace design. And as such, treat productivity and mental health as what they are, integrated, and make those changes at the level of the individual. At this point, you're probably saying, okay, that's great. So you're telling me that I should effectively try and understand something that's, how am I going to identify that? First of all, this is something this is still pretty taboo subject. Do people even know what's happening for them? Secondly, I'm supposed to collect information on what, everything? And then somehow I'm going to prioritize it. I'm going to have to get a bunch of people together in a room. There's going to be lots of leadership conversations, another set of meetings, prioritize issues, get key stakeholders bought in, and then somehow push those initiatives down when we already have all these other change initiatives. So I agree with you. It's a hard design problem. And when we originally approached this, we actually went kind of the traditional approach of doing very kind of ethnographic type of research and thinking about how we can understand and create a solution to this that will enable a more scalable approach. We're trying to provide a way which is not what you might consider the traditional approach to workplace changes. Slow, top-down, manual, or incomplete, but instead a way which is real-time, bottom-up, tech-enabled, and comprehensive. Let me show you how. So this is the Levell app. We've been a company that we've been in production for about 1.5 years now. And we've gone through our first sort of 3 pilots, and it's really exciting. Basically, what we've been working on is the design of an application that acts a little bit like experience sampling. It's something that's really easy to use, gives everyone in the workplace the ability to reflect on key signals that reflect how they're feeling, mentally, emotionally, physically, and motivationally. So we look at mood, stress, energy, and motivation. But are also signals or symptoms of when somebody is either in that kind of positive psychological well-being state or in the state where they're heading towards chronic stress, exhaustion, burnout, or even kind of the anxiety or low mental and emotional well-being. The genesis for using those 4 measures was based on the research on burnout engagement, the dimensions of burnout being ultimately exhaustion, detachment, so low work engagement through low motivation, and low mood, so it's kind of an early sign of depression, and then also the stress research, so looking at stress to kind of feelings of calm as an issue. So we chose those 4 things as daily measures, which we could use to kind of momentarily sample how people are feeling in work. And then we paired that with what we call blockers. So it's simply effectively a categorized plus open text feedback mechanism. And I really had to laugh when the previous presentation was talking about blockers and enablers. This is common parlance, I think, or hopefully becoming common parlance, in thinking about what is helping and what is blocking people's mental health and productivity at work. And again, how do you design the right set of questions that will actually enable people to easily understand what it is that's potentially causing how they're feeling, select those issues readily, not miss anything, but also get the opportunity to contribute more detail where they feel it's convenient or would actually help and feel cathartic to them. Again, we looked back at a lot of the literature on stress and burnout to try and understand what are the key categories of issues that impact people's feelings in those areas, what you see as correlations. And we came down to a set of, I think there are 7 different categories that we look at across things like work demands and resources, work processes and work culture, company policies, also work relationships, and then things that are in personal non-work. And then we also give employees the opportunity to feedback ideas. So you're having this problem. What do you think is the solution? What's interesting is that there's been research done actually in Japanese manufacturing firms about kind of the level of information that's available to leadership versus to frontline employees. And of course, while frontline employees are people who have the problems, they also have the most information, therefore they are also more likely to have the solution. So it's much more interesting and much more efficient to not only gather feedback on issues, but also gather feedback on potential solutions directly from the people who are having them at that time. Effectively, yeah, so we're going through signals of performance capacity and also well-being, so physical, mental, emotional, and motivational state. Issues and drivers of root causes, we do some benchmarking, and that's embedded in a participatory platform, which has a couple of advantages. The first is that employees are effectively incentivized to contribute, so a little bit like was spoken in the Fujitsu talk, it's kind of a collaborative data sharing, and you do need a third-party intermediary to help with that, but it's okay, great, I'll give you this information such that you can help me better in a more personalized way. Also, really, really interestingly, both productivity and mental health, these are strongly correlated to perceived feelings of job control, which is, do I feel like I have not only control and flexibility of what I'm doing, but also that I have an impact on my environment and the things around me. So giving employees a voice to contribute ideas, both problems and issues, is a fantastic way. It's an intervention in and of itself. And then the last thing is what I mentioned about leadership, right? So actually, rather than create additional stress to try and figure out all the answers, let's just engage employees in understanding what the solutions are. I just thought I'd give you a little bit of an example from one client that we've been working with just to show you some interesting patterns that kind of come out in the data and make some comments about how they're different across different organizations. So this is obviously a little changed, but this is an example of profiles of the 10 questions that we ask specifically around burnout and engagement at the outset. And you can see this particular workforce is highly engaged with their job. They feel used up at the end of the day, almost all of them. That's the exhaustion piece. They're feeling strained. They don't yet feel that frustrated, and they don't feel like the stress is overwhelming yet. So that already tells you some fascinating information about what's going on in that workplace. It's the imbalance of the work that they have to do, but it is not necessarily a psychologically intimidating or threatening environment, and they don't feel like they're going kind of over the brink. Approximately 57% of the issues that are arising, kind of driving these moments of low well-being and low productive or performance capacity are work-related, but 43% of how people are feeling is based on stuff that happened outside of work. And then we can kind of break it down into these different sections. Really interesting, this was common across every organization. The balance of work demands and resource was absolutely critical to individual feelings of mood, stress, energy, and motivation, and that is also very directly linked to research. This particular organization's remote working and community came up as significantly bigger than other organizations, which was really interesting, reflecting the research that you were saying. In other organizations, work relationships were more important in driving, which is managerial relationships per se. But that's it. It's funny to think about how something that's so complex, when we think about the cost to the workplace, the cost to the NHS, the costs to our economy, of these twin problems of productivity and mental health are actually very integrated at the level of the person. And though it's very early days, some of the experiments that we've been running are showing that actually, when you position it positively and you engage employees in talking in a way which is accessible, using terms that don't have taboos, like mood, stress, energy, and motivation, they're very neutral. We talk about them every day. You can actually unearth information about what specific things, both in work and non-work, are driving that, and then become much more empowered, both as an individual. And we did user research interviews after this, and we actually found that people were, based on the fact that they were even seeing how they were trending, making changes. Not everyone, people who were more felt more self-confidence, self-efficacy, but some people were. And then also empowering leaders in the organization. Like I said, it's early days. I'm very interested to speak to anyone who is working in this type of area or may have other additional experience that could inform the work that we're doing or the data that we collect. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions at all from the floor?
Thank you. I'd like to thank you for your presentation and the previous speakers. I think they've been very interesting and I suspect quite important. My question is, your last slide showed the workplace-related element, which didn't surprise me, was very, very low in terms of being attributed to people's mental health problems. And I'm intrigued as to why such an important topic is appearing in a conference like this, as opposed to any other forum. So I'd be really interested to know whether you think that this sort of discussion is going on at other types of events which aren't to do with FM and workplace and so on, or why it's cropping up here. Is it because of the link to the productivity thing that workplace is so commonly associated with, perhaps?
So the links to work and work design are large. They're over 50% of the drivers.
Sorry, I meant the pink one, in terms of work environment.
Work environment, yeah. So interestingly enough, this is relatively recent when we finished kind of doing this. In fact, when we did this, we didn't know what we would find. It could have been, and it could be different for other organizations, that work environment, particularly things like, so for example, the interruptions, distractions came up in as one of the drivers. Things like open plan office, or the way in which I feel supported or not by my colleagues, kind of the psychological environment, could be huge in some organizations. It's going to kind of depend on how that looks. I don't think we have, honestly, enough data necessarily to tell. So I said we've done 3 pilots so far, relatively small, kind of between 50 and 150 people. It's hard to know. I could be speculating on a lot of things in terms of why that is, right? We're talking about how people process things in their environment, and the interactions with individual people may sort of write quite large in one psyche relative to the baseline kind of experiences that I'm having in my environment. So I don't actually know. But the other thing that I find is extremely interesting is that this, speaking to kind of this audience of people I've met today, actually the approach. So in terms of individuals within organizations or helping organizations who might think in an integrated manner, I found that workplace designers and individuals who are thinking about the built environment are thinking in the way which is the most integrated. And so I think this is a really important community to engage with, both personally and also maybe perhaps community to kind of think about how you could help bring that attitude, how you structure build environments, into how you structure organizations, and also work into other colleagues and divisions that you might be interacting with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Another great presentation. Very quick question. Have you found any correlation between mental health and productivity with work type or job type?
So yes, so you would be looking at, what you'd be looking for are common causal factors. So things that are more likely to create conditions of say stress and burnout, work job types or work environments that are more likely to create stress and burnout, which then be creating potential issues of productivity, performance, and mental health. Is that what you're asking?
I'm just trying to wonder whether certain types of jobs create more mental health issues and productivity, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well,
I
okay, so, yeah, I mean, to be honest, yes. So there are some elements that are really important. So like I mentioned, the level of job control is really, really important. So jobs in which you have little control over how you spend your time. I mean, unfortunately, I started my career in finance, so I'm just going to say the whole financial services industry, having experienced that, is one. It's usually on the job role, so jobs that have high demands, high pressure, high deadlines, limited support from either your manager or those close trusted relationships, and limited control are really kind of deadly, so to speak, for one's risk of stress, burnout, and mental health issues. The other side of that is more about individual job match, so things like feelings of unfairness, exclusion, and values alignment, lack of values alignment, are also quite powerful triggers for issues like loneliness. They're linked to the sort of cynicism element of burnout and poor mental health.
Thank you.
Time for one more question.
But I'd love to do this across every industry and find out, so yeah.
The app was intriguing. Is there any link between how you're getting people to monitor those factors and the sort of first step of CBT? In other words, for those of you who are not familiar with CBT, it's very common to be recommended for a week or two to track the things that are causing you anxiety, sort of on an hourly basis, giving them a scale, writing down the symptoms you feel physically and what you're doing at the time, and you use that as a way of trying to reveal the things that are causing you difficulty. Have you attempted to reflect on that approach and deliberately incorporate it into what you've done, or not?
Yes, so I mean, we did review pretty much like all of the major techniques that are in use for addressing mental health problems, and also all the major techniques that are used for workplace redesign and corporate innovation. I also do corporate innovation consultancy. So yes, that was an inspiration to us, both that and just the academic approach, which is called experience sampling. There's a kind of category of research which looks into, actually people like Daniel Kahneman, if you know him, so was one of the pioneers of this area of research, looked into the drivers of subjective well-being. And they do these cycles, these periodic sprints, where they provide research participants with little applications that let them track during 3 times a day how they're feeling and associate it with activities. So you can use, a discovery tool in both ways. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.